Good evening, and welcome to episode 9 of the Taking Back the Narrative podcast. This season, we are focusing on the post Jewish genocide reality. So, with us today, I want to welcome our guest, my good friend, Mark Kennedy. So, a little bit of a background. So, Mark, I feel like you and I met on Facebook a couple of years ago, and we bonded over our love, first of politics, and then more so for the purpose of this podcast episode over our love of geopolitics, especially with what's going on in the world at large and more specifically related to Israel. So I knew for a while that I wanted to have you on. I just didn't know at which point. So thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely, it's a pleasure to be here, and let's get to it.
Perfect. So do you want to tell the audience who may not know you so far a little bit more about your background? Like, what got you interested in politics? Were you a political kid growing up? What got you involved?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, thanks for getting me on here. Yeah, my background is basically I always loved the notion of the political thrill of things. And it's interesting once you really get involved in the nitty-gritty of politics. You start to notice and find out for yourself that everything is a game, and I
Mhm.
think that really interests me, the game aspect, and the thrill to it. It's not just the overall concept of politics, but it's just the nitty gritty of it. But politics overall has to do not just what we have here, like political campaigns or just in general politics, but it has a lot to do with the geopolitical spectrum of things. So when someone gets involved in politics, a lot of that has to do with in terms of what's happening around the world. And so combine these two things and you get a political junkie basically. So yeah.
Perfect. And was there an inflection point where like an event happened that turned you specifically onto that, or just general?
It just yeah, it's like when a baby basically comes into like when he sees food for the first time,
Mhm.
and so you don't have to really teach him
Right.
about food. It just like
Just knows.
yeah, it just knows about
Right.
it, and starts. He doesn't know what's good and what's not,
Right.
but that comes in a later date where it makes the choice. But the same thing, like politics to me, basically, it's like it was literally like food. I really loved it. I love the thrill about it. Now, in terms of being on the right side of politics, that's already up for me to decide. Um, but yeah, again, um, I would say that politics is getting involved in politics. It doesn't have to be like in a very high level. Everyone can get involved in politics. I actually have a recently me and some of y'all know have launched a political platform, a tool that engages with voters, and I think I've shown you that a bit. And I can say we've launched it like 10 days ago, like little marketing and almost
Congratulations.
yeah, almost no marketing. And the feedback that we get is just tremendous. People are getting on it. They rate policies. They, of course, pledge their votes. And it's really, of course, for everyone, just not one political party. But you pledge your votes. You create teams of, you know, bringing in, um, a pyramid voting system of bringing in votes by creating teams in a multi-tier system. And astonishing, people are, taking teams, people are creating teams, they're bringing out voters that wouldn't wouldn't have participated in the political arena. Now they're participating. Now they're more involved because, again, we are in interesting times,
Mhm.
especially the last, the last year. The past year, and I think October 7th is like in a few weeks from now. The past year has been very turbulent, very volatile in the world overall. But you know, it really changed a lot of people that were on the sidelines of politics and are realizing now that, oh, actually politics is something important, because if we don't get involved, then we might end up with a Biden administration, and that is absolutely horrific, absolutely horrific. The damage they've done
Mhm.
to the state of Israel is absolutely horrific and disgusting. And so we do have to get involved. Politics is just not like, oh, I like politics. I don't like politics. We do have to get dirty. We do have to get involved, and we need to make a difference. So that's basically me.
Absolutely. So we're going to include the link to the app underneath the podcast recording so everyone can access it if it's ready to go. And no, that's great. That's elevating the interface of political inclusion, which is what's needed. And there's a famous saying, I'm sure you've heard of it. If you don't pay attention to politics, politics will happen to you. Everyone is affected by politics. They just don't know it. So for me, it was a completely different thing. To me, it was not like when I was a baby seeing food for the first time. I was very indifferent to politics. I grew up in a Zionist home. I'm first generation American. For those who might not know, my parents came from communist Russia. So I guess the threat of communism was always in the background. And my parents were and remain Republicans, but it was not like today. Like they were Rhino Republicans because there was no other choice. And moving to New York City, there were times where, gasp, I even voted for Democrats. I remember, and this is so embarrassing to admit, it's my second time admitting this on a podcast, but I voted for Schumer one time. I know, do not tar and feather me. I also voted one time for Cuomo because I simply didn't know the Republican candidate. And to me, it was all about name recognition. What did so and so candidate do for New York City, especially? And obviously, I didn't even realize the grander, malfeasance that they were committing against America at large. I wasn't even thinking about Israel because until 2014, I didn't care about Israel. I was fairly anti-Israel for 20 years. Many factors came into that. Um, Improper anti-Semitic, more accurately, apt terminology that not just was in the media, but it was perpetrated, still is, by a lot of Jewish organizations. I joined Jewish organizations here in New York to make Jewish friends. I didn't have Jewish friends in college completely by choice. That's something that I was interested in. And here they were talking about Palestine and Palestinians. They were talking about settlements and apartheid. And so, like, oh my gosh, like, what is Israel doing? Like, I can't believe that they stole land from the Arabs. I guess we all came from Europe. It's all the anti-Semitic
Right.
crap. So that's the thing. And, we wonder why there are Hamas protesters outside our windows in New York City. Half of them don't even hate Jews. Half of them are fed the same propaganda. And had they been fed accurate propaganda, quarter to half of them would not have been marching. So for me, when I became a Zionist, that's when I became a very concerned Republican. But again, it was always like, okay, so what's the actual difference between the Democrats and the Republicans? The rhinos back then, there was no Patriot Party and the Democrats. So to me, it was eeny, meeny, miny, mo, right? Like, like literally sitting at the ballot, who do I vote for? Does it really matter? It's the same crap. So President Trump, to me, was the absolute game changer. The rise of the Patriot Party, and that's what sparked the real clear conscious divide between the Republicans and Democrats. Anyone can see, anyone who has been alive for the past
Right.
many years, your life under a Trump presidency versus your life under the Jihad Joe, as I call him, presidency, and Hamas Harris, Kamala would be even 5 times worse
100%.
who she's surrounded herself with. And so we see it with Israel today. Obviously there's a lot of blame to go around to Israeli leadership. We'll definitely get into this a little bit later on in our podcast today. But at the same time, America also affects it, right? Like you have Jihad Joe and Blinken strong arming Israel, denying weapons to Israel that Israel had already been approved for, telling Israel not to go into Rafah, where they found hostages and how many hundreds of tunnels. And the Trump presidency, we know that he was the complete opposite. So, speaking of Israel, we all know, most of us have heard what happened today with the beeper gate, as it's being called.
Yeah.
So, anyone who has a beeper, I would double check that it hasn't done any damage yet. But no, and that was genius. I think that Mossad gets more and more creative. I have not been more proud of Mossad between, we'll get into this a little bit later too, with the how they use the ICR, these are the the IRGC agents to kill Hania inside Tehran, inside a very, very protected government compound, to having beepers explode, injuring 4,000, or they're now calling it the 4,000 brisses. And plus, and how many did they kill? 11 or 12?
Yeah, it's currently at around between 9, 10, 11. That's around the number.
A good teenage amount.
Yeah.
So, but at the same time, and that's all great and good, but there's still an active war going on, right? It's like we have Mossad, and that obviously they kill, but they also, their main purpose is to induce psychological fear into the against our enemies. So let's parcel it out. So speaking of Hezbollah, what exactly is going up north? So let me set it up for the audience. So there are about 80,000, give or take, right? Maybe I've heard 90,000, 80,000 displaced Israelis up north. Now, going back, so there was the Lebanon War, the first Lebanon War of 82, where the Christian government of Lebanon asked Israel, begged Israel for help, because for our audience, they let in 100,000 former Israeli Arabs who were fleeing Israel in 1948, not because Israel kicked them out, far from it, but because they were fleeing to Lebanon and other Arab countries in order to help Arab nations kill Jews faster. So here was Christian Lebanon. It was 95% Christian in the early 20th century. So here they are with this growing Arab Muslim population. Obviously, they multiplied, and they were harboring these terrorists, PLO terrorists. They were wreaking havoc in Jordan, wreaking havoc, obviously in Lebanon and Syria. They got out of control, and they were attacking Christian civilians. So that was 82, but the Christian government was weak. And then when Israel came in and fought the fight, Christians were nowhere to be found until, remember, the very end, after the general was killed. Do you remember the Christian general's name, or the Christian president's name, by any chance?
It's not. No, it's not. I don't have it right now.
Okay, we'll fill it in. It's fine. So, anyways, he died, and so then the Christian army, the Southern Lebanon army, decided to enact a massacre against, and you obviously know this, decided to enact a massacre against several of the refugee camps of the Arabs in southern Lebanon. And who got blamed? Israel got blamed, even if Israel had nothing to do with it. Absolutely. Like, if you go on Google today, you will see like, oh, Israel was the butcher of 82 and massacre of this camp and that camp. Nothing could be further from the truth. So obviously that fueled the Arab terrorism. 2006 was the second Lebanon war, and most of it, I personally, maybe you can agree or disagree, most of it for me on my end was placed on Ehud Barak, because he pulled out of the security zone in southern Lebanon in 2000 after Israel held it for 22, 23 years. So you give up security, and in the interim, you had
the same thing happened in Gaza too.
exactly, and you had the Hezbollah build up. So, and that was it. But to Israel's credit, in 2006, Israel hit Hezbollah so hard. Remember, it decimated southern Lebanon that Nasrallah, after the war, remember what he said? He said, we kind of regret starting this war with Israel because look at all the damage that was done. So now, and you can fill in the blanks from what I'm seeing on my end, and this is why I'm criticizing Israel a bit. And of course, we're criticizing the terrorists, but terrorists are going to be terrorists.
Right.
Rats are going to rats. It's our responsibility. What are we going to do about it? So what I'm seeing is a lot of tit for tat, right? Like we hit his Hezbollah, and again, I'm not criticizing the idea of to me is one of the best armies in the world, one of the bravest. It just, in my opinion, it's being underutilized by the government. So to me, I see a lot of tit for tat. So we strike Hezbollah, Hezbollah strikes Israel, then we have a new wave of tit for tat. We kill maybe a couple hundred terrorists, they send over missiles, and on and on and on. So, but what exactly is going on that maybe I'm missing and maybe the audience is missing?
Yeah, so regarding what happened today, I must say we have to put it in a perspective, an overall perspective, because I think what's being played here is a long-term game.
Mhm.
Like we can look at every situation individually and say, oh, so they fired rockets, or at Israel returned artillery fire or bombed some places. We can look at it like a tit for tat, or we can definitely look at it in um, a long-term situation that is happening. And I would say that what happened today definitely proves my point that this is already going on for months behind the scenes, um, about preempting anything that Hezbollah might do. And I would go into detail. This entire attack um, happened through beepers or radios or phones, whatever people want to call it. And what the updates are about that is that a bit less than 20 grams of a certain high quality explosive, very expensive explosives has been used in those beepers or phones. Um, and these were basically brought into Lebanon 5 months ago.
Mhm.
So let's just go into that. In putting those explosives into every beeper. I don't know exactly how it works, or I'm not deliberate to say, but I don't know exactly how it works. But putting um, these explosives into thousands of these devices, like bringing it in through any means necessary by shipping or whatever it may be. Someone in the Hezbollah organization had to have some contact of buying these devices, using them.
May
And
I interject for 1 second? This is going to add
sure,
to what you're saying. Do you suspect, and again, this is speculation, that there was a Mossad wholesaler obviously fronting for a regular one, or do you think that there was a mole or many moles inside Hezbollah? So, like, okay, so this is going to add to your answer. How
yeah.
entrenched is Mossad, in your opinion, inside Hezbollah? Or do you think that they're using just spies within Hezbollah itself, those who are willing to be paid off or those who are willing to turn?
Yeah. No, so again, this is what I've been, going towards is it's more than just an operation. This is what I'm trying to tell the audience. It's more than just an operation. Every operation, it seems like, Israel does that, Israel does this, and we just, oh, very nice, very cool. It's a trendy thing. It becomes a very trendy, nice thing that Israel has done. But there's so much planning going into every operation. that it's just mind-boggling what happened. What we're seeing here is definitely they had to be some coordination between Hezbollah and someone or more than someone in order to just use these devices as a communication tool among Hezbollah operatives.
Right, because
So
it was no civilians. No civilians were
yeah, no
harmed.
civilian,
It
exactly.
was only Hezbollah.
Exactly. So we have to really, and we don't know all the details, of course, but we have to understand this is going back 5 months at least, which means planning has been taken a few months back. So what I'm saying is it's absolutely mind-boggling. And I would add to this, what we've seen today, I'll make this statement. What we've seen today is the greatest operation, preemptive operation. Because let's not kid ourselves. We're still waiting, for Iran to respond on the Ismail Hania assassination that happened just months ago, which is another story for itself. But so at the end of the day, where is that retaliation? So my opinion of that is that Israel definitely understands that there is some work being done behind the scenes in terms from the Hezbollah and the Iranian side that has been, they definitely have more, has been more ready for a strike or multiple strikes against Israel. And they've been preparing for that for quite some weeks or maybe even months. And everything, if you're going to go back the past few weeks, everything you've seen Israel do in terms of, using the Israeli Air Force, striking multiple important places in Lebanon, in Syria, everything is to preempt the strike and take out very important military logistics or military personnel or military, places that would weaken Iran and its proxies. So what we're seeing here is a very long-term plan. And what happened today is something that I would say, and I'm going back to my statement, since 1967, where Israel has bombed the Egyptian Air Force and completely demolished before this war even started and even began, based on intelligence. They had a massive amounts of intelligence higher up in the government, in the Egyptian government. They completely dismantled the Air Force of the Egyptian army. Massive preemptive strike, which, by the way, was definitely so instrumental in actually Israel winning that war, because Israel had completely superiority over the skies. So I think this attack now goes back to what happened there at the time back in 1967. It's one of the biggest operations, preemptive operations, that I've seen in a long time. And again, we don't know the details of the operation, but I would say this is a huge step forward in, not even escalating the situation, but dismantling Hezbollah and Iranian capabilities. Not only that, I'll add, they don't know who to trust over there.
Exactly, right. Same. That's why it was so genius, and we're going to get to this in about a couple of minutes. But that's why it was so genius for Mossad to use the IRCG agents, because like think about it, like there are thousands of them. It's like, oh my gosh, like was it you? I mean, they caught them, but then they are thinking, who's next? Like, are you going to rat us out? Are you going to detonate? I don't know who to trust. The same thing here. And it also shows, of course, that we can reach anywhere. And we already knew that about Mossad, but I think that Iran seems to forget that every couple of months, just where where Mossad can pop up. So you were talking about the IAF. So speaking of the Air Force, My question, just in general, it wasn't to you, but like I ask this multiple times a month since the war started and Hezbollah got involved. Why, in your opinion, do you think Israel is not just decimating southern Lebanon like it did in 2006, which turned into a verb? 2006, 2006 southern Lebanon.
Yeah. Now, I think we 2024 in
Mhm.
this time and this area we live in terms of war and how we fight wars, I think has completely changed in a way that being more targeted and getting more results for less.
But in terms of soldiers, right? So like we'll get to Gaza next, but in on the border with Hezbollah, we're losing soldiers also. So is it worth it to have fallen soldiers on our side where technically even more damage can be done through the Air Force? Or am I missing some pieces here?
No, so we definitely have to have some kind of force at the at the northern border. There's no questions about it. Israel has to have some kind of, deterrence over there in terms of forces.
No, but
But
meaning why can't it just be completely done only with airstrike?
because again, it always has to do with the international community. At the end of the day, that's what they're dealing with. They're dealing with.
But why? Okay, but why does Israel care? Because the international community was not attacked on October 7th, only Israel was. And it's not the international community that is continuously being attacked by missiles, only Israel.
True, true. And I don't disagree with that. I'm just saying that the international community is very hostile. And I always go to the fact that Israel has to be very smart in choosing their battles. Now, other countries would not have to go through that in terms of,
We didn't after 9/11.
yeah, in
We
terms,
literally bombed an innocent
absolutely,
country completely.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And
But
no one blinked an eye.
absolutely. But in terms of Israel, that's just the game that is played. Um,
But how much longer are we going to tolerate that? Because, or is it going to take the right leader? Because you and I have discussed this ad nauseum. This is out in the public. I've written about it. To me and many others, Bibi has been nothing but weak during this entire war. And I would love like an Amahai Shikli in office or even a Ben Gavir, someone who will say, fuck you, world. We will do what we need to do to ensure safety because ultimately we know that the more moderate Arab countries would privately celebrate. We know that Egypt privately, like if Israel did what needs to be done in Gaza, which we're going to talk about very shortly, they would thank Israel privately, of course, and never
yeah,
never publicly. And so it's Saudi Arabia because what's happening in Gaza, what's happening with Hezbollah, it's a headache. Like I can guarantee that Sisi, like, look, Sisi doesn't like love Israel, but October 7th was a headache that he didn't need. You and I have been to Egypt. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a bit too. But I saw a completely different Egypt than what's painted out in the public sphere.
right.
You know, I didn't see terrorists running amok. I saw a very safe country. I saw checkpoints, plenty of checkpoints in one day. I had to go through 10, five there, five back, military everywhere. There were no delusional Egyptians trying to make peace with the Gazans, even though they're mostly the same people. No one cared. They're like, okay, well, they're over there being terrorists, and we don't want anything to do with that. There was no open borders, right? Except during Ramadan. It was the only month that they kept their border crossing open. No one was driving anyone to hospitals inside Egypt because they said, you guys have 36 hospitals inside Gaza before the war. Obviously, now that there's only a few, but before the war, there were 36 hospitals. So no Egyptian was thinking, "Ooh, let me use some Tikkun Olam, idiocy and drive these terrorist supporters to our country." No one was giving work permits to anyone in Gaza from the Egyptian side. So I just think that the mindset needs to shift. We're not living in this idealistic, we're all going to be kumbaya neighbors. And sometimes you have to strike your neighbors in order to have peace and not pay attention to the outside world because America is not even a real ally of Israel. President Trump was the only exception, the only one. I mean, like President Reagan was slightly better, but even, reports are coming out too that, yes, like they were publicly supporting the Lebanon war in 82, but privately you had Caspar Weinberger chastising Israeli leadership, like, oh, like, we're seeing too much bombing on TV. Could you guys pipe it down? I'm like, it's not a real friend to say that, because when we have places around the world to take care of business, we're not listening to anyone.
Yeah.
So I think Israel needs to get out of that mindset that, like, oh, we're this like vassals. And that's why I actually don't even say state of Israel. I say the nation of Israel, the country of Israel, because I have a feeling that a lot of these Israeli leaders, they keep saying state of Israel, and then they act like a state. They act like a vassal state to America. And it's not like Israel's not America's younger sibling. It's its own standalone strong nation. But to me, it's more, it's more frustrating. It's like we know what we have to do, but then there's that massive psychological roadblock.
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. I don't disagree with that. Like, again, as an America First advocate, I've called plenty of times. I've called for, less involvement, the U.S. having less involvement with Israel, and a lot of people that are actually pro-Israel are saying, like, what? Less involvement?
Yeah.
And the response to that is, yes, less involvement with Israel is actually better for Israel. I think we have to understand that Israel needs to be self-sufficient in terms of weaponry, in terms of economically, which I think they are in a way.
They were on their way before the war.
Yeah. But so Israel has to be very careful to not get entangled in long, weary wars that are doomed not necessarily to fail, but are doomed to just suck out the economic prosperity of Israel, which a lot of Israelis are, definitely need prosperity over there. They got to be very careful, and this is why international community comes into hand. Because at the end of the day, Israel is a democratically, elected nation,
which also has its positives and negatives.
Which also has its positive and negatives.
To be a Middle Eastern nation and be a democracy, because
absolutely,
there is a reason it doesn't work in the Middle East, and it has nothing to do with Jews and Arabs. We're one and the same people. So we have different values, but we're one and the same people. And so there's a reason why at times maybe not being a democracy, like during a wartime.
This is what I'm coming to, this is what I'm saying, is actually because of Israel being democratically, having democratic elections, and the government is so volatile there that not only every 4 years over there, it's like, it could happen in an instant. You can have like 10 elections in the span of 1 year.
They love their snap elections.
I'm exaggerating here, but they do love debating elections and, becoming prime minister, then getting out, 6 months later, and then again. But at the end of the day, because of that volatility, there's certain things that Israel, at the end of the day, cannot do. Not they cannot do because they just, can't, and it's impossible. They cannot do it because it's gonna hurt them in the long run. What I'm saying is Israel has to be very careful and very targeted and getting the most results they can with less of what they do. So in terms of what happened today is huge because there is, some kind of negotiation happening, of course, by the U.S., which are feckless leadership. Like Donald Trump would have probably gotten that done, like in an instant. Having the Lebanese government with Hezbollah and Israel actually coming to the table and negotiate until where the line is in southern Lebanon and actually pushing away
Mhm.
um, Hezbollah for the further north. And I think that's an extremely important negotiation, which again, feckless leadership. That's why it's really not happening. But this kind of targeted operation, which is not costing any lives, not really costing any money, but simultaneously literally destroyed the communication in Hezbollah and its ranks, and absolutely disabled massive amounts of fighters and Hezbollah militants that have been coordinating various things in terms of attacking Israel and other stuff. So that's just smart fighting. That's just fighting in a smart way and not getting entangled in
Mhm.
this constant destruction of going into places and really not knowing how to get out. And I think that's more positive for Israel. And we got to understand that not always going into a country, dismantling and destroying that country is to the benefit, because at the end of the day, in 2 years, that leadership in Israel is out the door and there's a
Right.
new leadership coming in. So we got to be very careful what we're doing, and what Israel's doing. And again, sometimes it's necessary.
Mhm.
Sometimes going in and getting rid of the rat is necessary. But overall, if you take, if you want to look at the overall picture, because it is an overall picture, it's not just one war, it's not just one place, it's not just one city, it's simultaneously multiple cities and multiple countries. We're talking about the Houthis in Yemen, and the Iranians in Iran, various militants in Iraq, Hezbollah in Syria, even from Jordan, which um, there was last week there was something going on with that border, um,
Mhm.
an attack,
Right. There was an attack that killed three Israeli,
3 Israelis.
the guards were killed.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
so 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 what we have to understand is we're very rushed into, we got to destroy that, and but we got to be very smart and look at what can we achieve with less. And I think that attack, and the same what happened in the 6 Day War, which by far is one of the most fabulous military wars that there's
Right.
ever been in modern history, maybe even before that, is just very smartly winning a war. We can win a war smartly, very intelligently, by using limited resources, but targeting what can be of a, a bigger result.
So
And
you're saying, oh, sorry, go ahead.
yeah, it's okay.
Oh, so you were saying, so in 2006, when we decimated Southern Lebanon, when I say we, I mean obviously the IDF and the IAF. So when they decimated Southern Lebanon, so you're saying that the casualty count of the civilians in Lebanon was too great to enact that now. Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah, in a way, in
Mhm.
a way, again, Israel had a lot of Israel lost a lot in those Lebanon wars,
Hmm.
um, and the enemy wasn't that smart. I think the enemy really learned a lot in the past 20 years. It's become extremely ruthless.
Right.
It's become extremely smart. And what Israel did today is showing that we have to change tactics.
Hmm.
Like, such an operation has not happened in the past 60 years.
Right.
So what that tells you is that you gotta adapt, right? So if the
Hmm.
enemy is smart, you gotta oversmart them.
Right.
And I think this operation is definitely showing that you're over smarting your enemy. And now what happens is Hezbollah is in shock.
Mhm.
I don't think they actually fired any rockets today.
No,
Hezbollah,
and they didn't.
they
Yeah.
didn't.
Yeah.
So Hezbollah is in shock. Iran doesn't really know what's happening. It looks like, um, definitely in terms of intelligence, it looks like uh, Israel has broken the dam in terms of the ranks of being assimilated to the ranks of, you know, I don't know how high it goes, but definitely, they're definitely being assimilated and being integrated in those ranks in the IRGC and some of the Hezbollah proxies. So again, there's definitely something going on,
Hmm.
and it's a long term operation, and what we've seen until now is, again, knocking out those logistics, knocking out those military targets that are actually crucial for Hezbollah, for Iran to actually commit something big. And what I'm saying is Israel has to be smarter than they've ever been before. And we cannot, and I'm a very anti-war person, especially in the US. I'm a huge anti-war person.
Hmm.
Israel cannot be sucked into a long-term war with almost little results. It cannot happen. We got to fight smart, and I think Israel can do it. And they got to have the right leadership and military, which also is a huge, problem. The infighting over there has to stop. It's not healthy. But that's my opinion on the whole situation. And we live in very interesting times. This is a huge development, huge development. I'm happy that we had actually this podcast on such a day,
So
because
am I, because originally
this is like breaking. Like, this is, people
Mhm.
don't understand what happened today.
So I'm actually glad that I rescheduled with you because we were
Yeah.
supposed to record on September 11th, and then we pushed it back to Sunday. Then I pushed it back again till today, and I think it was Kismet that that happened.
Did you know such an attack
I
is
think I
coming?
knew. I think I'm an undercover Mossad agent, but I'll never reveal my name in it. So no, but so okay, so let's put it on a geopolitical angle though.
Yeah.
So I know, like in Iran, obviously we have the Green Movement that has been fervently protesting against the regime there. Now, today, after what happened, and this is not the first time that a lot of Lebanese have been celebrating. Now, I don't know if they're Christian Lebanese or maybe Muslim Lebanese, but they're Lebanese. And you could see videos and they were saying, like, thank you, Israel. So, is anything to your best knowledge or maybe post war? Because, like you said, we cannot fight these endless wars. Like Israel can't, like you said, like the economy, right? Like the economy needs to regenerate. So much has been going to defense, and businesses are suffering, and families are in debt. And so my question is post-war, because eventually this war is going to end. I mean, I heard at least a couple months ago that some top military experts in Israel said like we need at least 2 years. So everyone's telling us to ceasefire under a year. It's not possible. We need like literally like a little bit more time than that. But there will be a date that the war is going to come to an end, hopefully with a very positive outcome for Israel. We need to hope. But do you see the Israeli government working with the Lebanese population to oust Hezbollah from their government? Is that something that's on the table?
It's a very interesting question.
Mhm.
Um, I don't think it can happen. I think that Hezbollah has a huge population and a huge following in Lebanon.
How, and I'm sorry to interject, but
Yes.
this is necessary. So we know in Iran, the guesstimates is that it's an 80-20 split, right? 80% is against the regime, the 20% that's for the regime. They're mostly working for the regime, they're getting paid by the regime. What do you think? And again, like we're not putting feet to your fire, so if you're incorrect, that's fine. But in your best estimate, what do you think the split is in Lebanon, pro Hezbollah, anti Hezbollah?
It's hard to say. Definitely it was more of a Christian country back in the
Before,
day.
right?
Yeah, a lot more. Like it was like
It was 95%.
exactly.
In 1905, it was 95%.
Yes. So definitely that has dwindled in numbers.
Mhm.
So again, I cannot put a number. I'm going to
Mhm.
be very careful. I cannot put a number, but it's way the population are there's a bigger. I would say there's a bigger population aligned with Hezbollah in Lebanon than aligned with Iran in um, in Iran. That is aligned. The population in Iran is less aligned with their government, with their
Right.
mullahs, than the population in Lebanon
That is
with
anti.
Hezbollah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's a problem.
It's a huge problem. It's a
Yeah.
huge problem. Yeah, of course.
Because they complain about Israel bombing their country. Well, if you don't want to be bombed, then you need to oust Hezbollah somehow. And then, in a way, like, I mean, yes, I know like a lot of Lebanese, there's actually a Lebanese, this is a personal story in high school. I went to prom with a Lebanese Christian.
Okay.
We, I mean, we were in high school, so we're not like dating, but whatever. We went to prom and he was interested in me and he wanted to ask me out. His mom was so against him dating a Jew. She's a Lebanese Christian, not Muslim, that she forbade us going on dates like after we went to one prom together. Like it's crazy. Or like even like on Real Housewives of New Jersey, there's some couple whose husband is Lebanese Christian. And I thought, oh wow, so maybe like not all of them are bad. No, like he goes on these rants online against Israel, especially after the Jewish genocide. So, but don't like they understand like, okay, like if you don't want to be bombed, it's very consequential.
Right.
No bombing, no Hezbollah.
Right.
Hezbollah equals bombing. So like I don't understand how they're not blaming the actual like I feel like I don't know like I feel like if Israel had some terroristic dictatorship that was bombing our countries other countries and then those countries would bomb Israel, I think like most Jews would understand where it's coming from and
Right.
then we would work to root out whatever evil was causing that. Like I don't understand, and yes there's propaganda and all of that, but somehow I feel like I don't know why, maybe because I think that Christians in Lebanon are smarter than the Arab Muslims in Gaza and Judea and Samaria.
Yeah, they are being massively
No, of course, but
persecuted.
right, but it wasn't for 80, it wasn't for almost 80 years, like in Gaza and in Judea and Samaria. So like those people are gone. But the ones in Lebanon, like you can see, like X equals Y. We send missiles, we get them back. So I don't understand how they don't, why they want to live like this.
Yeah. No, it's definitely a great question, but again, we have to go back to the notion that Lebanon is not that complicated because we know who the players are there.
Right.
It's not like it's that complicated. There's a lot of you know Christian leaders over there and more moderate leaders that actually were vehemently against Hezbollah actually starting
Right.
anything with Israel post October 7th. So we definitely have that, confirmed. Um, so, but Lebanon is a very interesting concept because there is the political element over there, and there's this, of course, the jihadi terroristic element of some part of the government there. Um,
And also the economy, right? So like whenever they have a horrible economy, they need these wars
yeah,
to distract.
yeah, but they don't necessarily want Israel. They don't necessarily want Lebanon to look like Gaza looks like now. So
Right.
I think that's in no one's interest. I think it's not even in Hezbollah interest because, as I said before, there is this political element that we don't see with Hamas that we see in Hezbollah. They do still have this political moderate element to them because of how things work there in terms of the government over there. and they're not completely in control. They're not completely in power, though they have a huge following in terms of the population. But compared to Hamas, Hamas was absolutely control of Gaza.
It was
No,
elected. It was elected
was elected. There
with
were
with enthusiasm.
with enthusiasm,
Let's not forget that point.
of course, and
Media men forgets always to mention.
yeah, and the polling suggests that there's the
Still a majority.
vast majority still support them.
Mhm.
That's been confirmed. So it's very different than Hamas. Hamas literally, is basically a dictatorial
Mhm.
concept there. There's no elections being held. They've killed many of their opposition, and
Mhm.
we did not see that happening in Lebanon. So it's very different, these two, and that's why I think negotiating for peace, even it's a short term peace, is I think more positive than actually getting sucked into a Lebanese war #3. And I think Israel cannot. I think Israel cannot do that. But in terms of Gaza,
Oh, yeah, so moving south to Gaza. So if you can give us an overview, because from what I see, okay, so we have control of the Philadelphia. Okay, is it pronounced Philadelphia or Philadelphia? Like how would you pronounce it?
Philadelphia.
Philadelphia. So we have control of that corridor. We have control of the
They
Netzer.
have they have a Philadelphia. We have a Philadelphia. It's almost the same war zone.
Right, right. But we want to make sure that obviously
The
we're
same
pronouncing
war
it
zone.
really. Yeah. So, but then also we're in control of the Netzarim corridor, which separates North Gaza from South Gaza, which the
Yeah.
IDF created as soon as the war started. So, how much of Gaza is the IDF actually in control of? And what's the difference between what's going on in North Gaza versus what's going on in South Gaza? Like, you can give me and the audience a bit of an overview.
Yeah. So where we again complicated issue. Everything about Israel is complicated. It's like
Right.
but what's currently the situation there is, of course, I would basically compartmentalize in three. Definitely the north.
Mm-hmm.
Israel is not in control of the north, but they do have now been able to do what they do in Judea and Samaria. They now go into some of these places in the north in an instant notice and just do targeted raids.
Mm-hmm.
Something that has not, they couldn't have done that a year ago. It was a war. It was like literally basically a terrorist.
It was a nest. It was a nest of terror.
Yeah, it was a nest of terrorists. Now, because of what they accomplished there, and I think we still underestimate what Israel has done in that place. And I think a lot of books will be written eventually
Mm-hmm.
in the military capabilities, the military accomplishments that Israel has done in a circumstance that no other country has been through. No other country has even tried of doing when it comes to military capabilities and you know in combat and urban warfare. So what they did is, so again, they had control, of course. Um, Basically, went out of the northern Gaza, focused on the southern Gaza. And what they can do now is just an incident. I think it happened. I think the beginning of this week or maybe last week, where they went actually in central Gaza, in the north, Gaza City or other places, and just are committing targeted raids. And for me, when I see that happening, is like, okay, so we're basically now in a situation where the North has become like Judea Samaria.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to go into one of these, those places, and something that people don't really report on is what's happening in Israel, in the Judea Samaria, massive operations of
Right.
just getting out, just targeting uh, terrorist encampments.
And they also found, unfortunately, tunnels in how do you pronounce the name? Tulkarm?
Yeah, total crime.
Tulkarm. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's also something that people just forget because they're going in.
Mhm.
It's a raid. It's an operation. Nothing major. No, what they have done the past few months in these places, which is in Israel, is something that just people just blow over, and it's absolutely as important what's happening there and that what's happening in Gaza. Absolutely, absolutely important. It's the same. There's no, this is happening in Israel, so it's not that important. That's happening. It's the same important and even more important because it's actually Israel. So,
I think we should also add that legally, Gaza is still very much part of Israel, per Article 80 of the UN Charter. And that's what I think we need to concentrate to. It's not Israel and Gaza, Jewish Gaza. It's
right,
a part.
right.
It's a part.
Absolutely, absolutely. Right, right. When you talk to the audience, of course, people don't understand that
Right, right, right.
concept.
Mhm.
And, it's a part of the brainwash propaganda that we've been subjected for 70 years.
And that's why it's my job as a science educator to always bring it back
Absolutely. This is why
into
you're
reality.
here.
It's like not wait. Like, think about this. It's not like we are targeting Egypt. Egypt is a sovereign nation. We're not going
Of
to
course.
Jordan. We're going into our own land that was stolen and then was resettled by 250,000 Egyptian nationals. They're mostly Egyptians there, and then they were radicalized.
Yeah.
And like now we have to deal with them because Egypt doesn't want their own radicalized population back. And something for the audience to take note for those who may not know, the non-Egyptians who ended up in Gaza, which were the former Israeli Arabs, they only fled to Gaza in 1948, only after Egypt got control of it. And it was only, just like into Lebanon, to help the Arab armies kill Jews faster for no other reason. Because again, Israel was not kicking out anyone. And the Arab armies in a lot of places, including Yaffo and Ashkelon, they were actually targeting the Israeli Arabs to get out. They were killing even Arabs and threatening entire villages. Like, if you don't flee to so and so country, we're going to demolish this entire village. And it's been documented. So it was a lot of movement for deliberate purposes, all against our people.
So let's go back.
Yeah.
So that's happening in the north. Uh, so
And
and
then you have Khan Yunis, that's central, correct?
Khan Yunis in the south
In the south. Okay. And what's in the center? Is that no, Gaza City's in the north?
and Nasrat.
Nazar. Okay. So Khan Yunis is talked about a lot. Of course, Rafiq we know is in the south. So
Right.
what's going on if you happen to know Khan Yunis, Rafiq,
Yeah.
like
So
what's
yeah.
there?
So in terms of the north, we've definitely said that.
Mhm.
I think in a way Israel has a bit of operational control. That like they can go in and just if they have intelligence, they'll go in, they'll commit a raid, they'll target some of these installations and just go out. And I think that's something that's an achievement that hasn't been done before. Like you couldn't have gone in without getting kidnapped. Um, what's happening in the south is a bit more complicated. It's basically, of course, an absolute war zone, an absolute combat zone. Um, Hamas over there is on its last legs. Uh, they definitely probably have really 20% really active fighters. I would say they know they're losing. Their rocket capabilities is almost none. They always it happen to fire here a rocket, there a rocket every 4 weeks, but it's nothing like they've used to do before. So their capabilities above ground is absolutely dismantled. Um, Underground is where it gets a bit complicated, of course. And I think what Israel is doing very consistently, though it's not being really reported, but very consistently, is they are cleaning up really tunnel by tunnel, and this is why so much of what happened in terms of hostages in the past few weeks is because of those steps that Israel is taking to really get rid of those underground installations. And a lot of these hostages are being hidden. And what I would say, and because I'm from the US, we have to acknowledge that Kamala Harris and Joe Biden has been absolutely wrong when it comes to Rafah. Absolutely wrong.
Right. Right.
They've said that this is a humanitarian zone.
It was as if they were working for Hamas.
Yeah, they said that this is a humanitarian zone. They said that that's the red line. We will absolutely put a U.S. embargo against Israel because if they enter Rafah,
Mhm.
that's an app. It really, that was one of the most disgusting things I've ever seen an administration do,
Mhm.
because
And that's
they
saying a lot because we
based,
do a lot of disgusting things
yeah,
against Israel.
they based that particular pure on politics and not on intelligence. They are hostages currently probably in Rafah, and we still don't know. But what we do know is the hostages that we actually found there. They killed those hostages there. They they kept those hostages there, and if Israel wouldn't have been tied with their hands um, and their backs, I think we probably would have, might have helped and rescued some of these hostages that are in Rafah earlier. And because of this standstill between the Israeli government and the US back and forth, literally tying them down to
Yeah.
not enter that place, I think that really costed Israeli and American lives. And it's absolutely disgusting. And today, I must add, because we're in this political part of the year in 2024, Kamala Harris just today again reiterated that she will put a weapons embargo.
Mhm.
She tried to get out of the question, but it was asked again, and she literally said, with few words, but literally said that she has no problem having a U.S. embargo against Israel, and it's unheard of. And this is why I say, get involved in politics, get involved in politics, because if she wins this election, Israel is going to be in a very tight spot, and I would say Israel's going to survive. I'm disagreeing with Trump when he says that Israel is not going to survive in 2 years from now. I am a believer in that nation. I am a believer in that God-given land that He gave us, and nothing will actually destroy Israel. It's not going to happen. A lot of people tried. A lot of powerful countries tried to eliminate this nation, but to no avail. They did not succeed. So, in that part, I disagree. I understand where Trump comes from, but I disagree. Israel is going to exist no matter who wins. But,
Mhm.
but it's going to be very difficult. It's going to be very difficult, especially what we're dealing now with. Because if you think about it, uh, Netanyahu really is not really interested in making a deal. I think at least until Trump hopefully gets elected. I think that's really in back of a lot of minds. If you can make a deal with Trump and not a deal with Kamala now, I'll take the deal with Trump later. That's one of the things. I think staying in political power. I think that's also one of the reasons why he doesn't want ceasefire. But again, if in terms of negotiating, you really want Trump negotiating a peace, some kind of a ceasefire, than having Kamala Harris negotiating something. I'm not saying that it's going to happen. I'm not predicting anything. But again, I'm coming back to what I've said. Get involved in politics
Mhm.
because it's not a joke. We are on the brink of something disastrous happening if Kamala Harris becomes president. Tim Walz is like one of the most, one of the worst people as a VP,
Extremely anti-Israel, even more
extreme,
than
exactly,
Hamas Harris.
extremely anti-Israel. extremely pro China, but extremely anti Israel. And he is just a disaster. A
He
disaster.
put up the Somali flag in one of his
Yeah, yeah.
press conferences.
He changed the Minnesota flag to assimilate more to Somali. This is what we're dealing with. We're dealing with absolutely craziness. Get involved. Get involved. I've seen a Pew Research poll not yesterday, last week, that we really don't know how Jews really voted in 2020. There's no numbers. People
No, actually, there were. It was
30, 30. What do you say?
It was 24%.
So it varies. It varies. There are some
The poll I saw
say
was
30%.
so the poll I saw. Okay, so I saw two polls. And this was after the runoff. So in Georgia, they took the Jews in Georgia. In Georgia, the Jews voted 24% for Trump. Overall in the country, it was paltry, it was 17%. And the Muslim vote for President Trump in 2020, guess how much it was?
Oh, probably was around 22% or more.
25%.
Yeah.
And so that's the thing. It's like, yes, like the Republican Party is pro-Israel now, but I've been to RNC events. And I remember being at the first debate up in Wisconsin last August. I didn't see many Jews, but I did see a lot of Muslims, and I talked to many of them. And I can guarantee that if we, as an ethnicity, the Jews, are not going to get involved in either party, the party for Democrats, they've already proven how anti-Semitic they are, and they have been since FDR. Like, I don't understand how anyone says like, oh, and the Democrat Party changed. The Democrat Party did not change whatsoever. They've been showing exactly who they are since FDR. Absolutely. Not one. I even thought that Kennedy was pro-Israel, but now I'm reading information that he actually wasn't. He pandered to Jews. He's like, oh, Israel must exist, and blah, blah, blah.
Friend.
But he was against Israel having a nuclear program.
Yeah, the greatest friend we had in Israel since President Trump was President Nixon, and
well, not his Secretary of State, that's for sure.
But he didn't. He didn't
revert.
Right. Secretary of State. Like Henry Kissinger really wanted for, and again, we have to understand what Henry Kissinger wanted. It's a whole different concept. There's a lot of things written about that episode, but
said he wanted Israel to get bloody first, which
is
like important. And that's why personally I'm against. I know this is controversial to say. Personally, I'm against Jews being involved in the upper echelons of American government because it's never worked out well. It hasn't ever. I'm against having a Jewish president. If you want to be president of a country and you're a Jew, Israel is there. They may call you.
Being on the radar in politics is always the best. You can always do the best things.
Right. Because also, let's say, imagine a Jew is president of the United States and does a lot of pro-Israel, emulating Trump, what Trump did. Right. There would be such a backlash because you're a Jew, you have double loyalty, this, that. So I'm going to disagree a little bit with you. Sure. I completely agree with President Trump and what he said about Israel not existing. So I don't think he meant Israel just being bombed to smithereens in 2 years if he's not elected. What I believe he means, and this is what I wholeheartedly
cease to exist. That was his word.
Well, he also
he's exaggerating. I'm not saying.
It was to install fear in Jews. So also, okay, first I want to emphasize this. Yeah. Any Jew who has voted for Democrats has Jewish blood in their hands. Any Jew that will continue to vote for Democrats, knowing especially what's going on in the direction of the Democrat Party, which is even more extreme than before, then you are no better than a capo during the Holocaust. You might as well be George Soros, taking property away from Jews and then being proud of that. And then the Jews that are pretending to be pro-Israel while voting for Democrats, they are hypocrites. So there has never been such a black and white choice. Why I agree with President Trump, even the bombastic way he said it, because everything you just shared militarily, what Israel has accomplished in Gaza, beyond brave, extremely proud that they're doing that. And like you said, you're right. Like, it hasn't been done in a while, maybe ever, like really getting into the root of these terrorist nests within Hamas. That is all very, very applaudable and laudable. Here's the problem. From a geopolitical point of view, Hamas does not care that it is losing. It knows it's losing militarily. It could not give a shit. And I'll tell you why. Because it is relying on the international community, and especially Bibi helped. Because when Bibi spoke to the US Congress, remember what he said? My jaw was just open when he said it. He said, we're not going to reoccupy Gaza, even though, like, you can't reoccupy your own land. Okay, as soon as he said that, Hamas won. And that's the problem. So they don't care if
Show
they,
the cards.
right, right. They don't care if they're going to lose every last of their fighters and all of their civilians that they're hiding amongst, because, okay, so Israel is now going to reclaim Gaza. Great. So the international community is going to come in. They're going to put in, most likely, let's say, the Palestinian Authority, which is Hamas in suits. There's no difference. In fact, they just merged together. What was it? 5 months ago, 6 months ago, and even before the war, the PA was paying off Hamas terrorists also, not just their own terrorists. So that's the goal of Hamas, that the PA is going to control Gaza, and that's it. They're going to replenish. There will be the next version of Hamas. It's going to be called something else, and they are going to. And then now you have Qatar, terror. It's not a nation; it's a terrorist organization that just happens to have land and oil. So you have Qatar, you have Iran if it does not get toppled. You have Turkey. Turkey is economically getting stronger. So if Erdogan continues on, if someone else replaces Erdogan, that is Erdogan-esque, right? And then you have the libtards of the EU that are very anti-Semitic, and you have the libtards in America of the Democrats that are very, very anti-Semitic. And that's the problem with the US, because, of course, we need Trump to win. Absolutely. But the problem with America, we vacillate too much, right? Like it swings. Like, okay, so you're going to have Republicans, and ideally we would say, okay, we're going to continue for 20 years and have this winning streak. It doesn't happen. Invariably, it goes back and forth. So in those 4 years, and hopefully Trump is going to win, Israel needs to ensure that it reclaims Gaza, that there's no Hamas rebuilding, there's no PA in charge, and Bibi in front of the U.S. Congress again. I was aghast that he even said that. He was like, "Oh well, moderate Palestinian." First of all, why are you lying to the world that they're Palestinian? So you and I are Palestinian. Yeah. Someone just told me that they're Palestinian. Some property.
If you would have
Yeah.
lived
Between 136 and
yeah.
1948, we would be Palestinians. An Arab, if you had called an Arab a Palestinian during that time period, you would get beat the fuck up for saying that. Like it's ridiculous. So it's on Israel to completely change and call them what they are: Arab occupiers. It's not that hard to say, because that's what they are. They're Arab occupiers in Judea and Samaria, except for the 30 to 40% who are genetic Jews. So, and there were talks, about like not so recently, maybe even 10 years ago, 15 years ago, about deportation, to deport a lot of the Arabs back to Jordan. The problem is you have the 30 to 40% of them who are genetic Jews. They were converted.
But some of that happened in 1948, no?
No, so because they didn't know at that time which clans were Jews and which were not. So thank you for the DNA tests. So they have a claim to the land. And actually, some of them have produced the most notorious terrorists. Some of them have helped Israel. So fine. So maybe they can stay and we can put them on probation. If you behave yourselves, you can vote in 5, 10 years. I don't know. Something could be worked out there, because that's the thing. Judea and Samaria, Arabs, different from the Arab invaders in Gaza. So it's so important to understand. So like, again, like winning militarily is one thing. And that's, again, that's praiseworthy. That's great. But the politics absolutely matter. So you can win militarily and then not reclaim Gaza and we're back at square one. And it's very naive. And I know you don't think like this. Certainly, I don't think like this. But I think there are Jews out there who actually think that was the last of the Jewish genocides. And it's not. Like, we know, you and I are smart. We know that in Judea and Samaria, even, something is being planned now, the next October 7th.
Yeah.
It's an variable.
They're always focused on one thing, and they're focused on killing Jews.
Right. And it's a waiting game. And that's the thing. There was no surprise. Like, I mean, of course, like I was shocked because like I didn't understand it much. But then you scope out a little bit and you're like, wait, they were promising a genocide since 1948 for almost 80 years. And then, well, even before that, you have Muslim Brotherhood that was created in 1928 in Egypt. Then, of course, Egypt resettled its 250,000 of its population in 48. And then before Hamas even was created, you had Fatah that was enacting the first intifada under Israeli rule. So that's the thing. Even if Israel rules Gaza, you still have to somehow subjugate that population if keeping them intact. So there needs to be that duality. Like, yes, like Israel's using its very, again, nothing against the military. The military, the feats that they accomplish, I don't think even our US Army could. What they're doing inside the tunnels, the rescuing, not releasing, the rescuing of the hostages and the way that they're able to do that. Like even the rescue, remember the 4 hostages, including Noah Argamani back in June? What other army could do that?
No.
No one. But having right,
but anything like it. We've not seen anything like it.
Anything, but that's the thing. And so, but having that duality, like, okay, like short term, we're having our wins. What is this going to look like 5, 10 years down the road? And not being, I think the problem with Jews, a lot of Jews, we're very reactive, right? Like, okay, this happened to us, we're going to do XYZ, but not playing, like you said, you mentioned this term a lot, the long game, right? So, like what you said, like what's happening in Hezbollah, that's smart in the long-term strategy. So that needs to be thought about. And hopefully some many in Israel are thinking long game in Gaza without being naive, without thinking that these anyone's going to reform in Gaza, anyone, because especially like now, like think about it, they're getting bombed. You think like, oh no, now we're going to like be great to Israel. Now we're going to love the Jews. Of course not. And then also I really cannot stand when some Jews have these videos of the Gazans saying like, oh, like we're against Hamas, we're getting bombed. Okay, just because they're against Hamas doesn't mean that they're going to be pro-Israel. They're pro another terrorist organization like Islamic Jihad. It's not one or the other. So we as a community need to be a lot more realistic that Hamas is in no rush. And same thing with hostages, right? Like everyone's like, oh, release the hostages, bring them home, bring them home. You think a terrorist organization is just going to like release the hostages? They did so back in November because we gave them 240 terrorists for 105 hostages. But back then, I believe it was easier. Now, especially, this is my opinion. I know it's maybe not so popular. I truly believe that the Bring Them Home Now movement was counterproductive because it had so much onus on and of course, like people should know about the hostages, but when you pay too much attention to that, Hamas was very grateful for that attention because that's why one of the reasons I believe that they were killing the hostages because they knew like the more we torture the hostages, all the slight is paid on us, we're inflicting more psychological torture on Israel. And so I think that had the Take Them Home movement been more quiet, had the hostage families not been turning up at RNC, at the DNC, I'm not saying that would have helped, but maybe the torture would have been less and let the IDF do its job. Sometimes it's best to pipe down.
True. I would say, and you've really said a lot here, but I would start with, first of all, in terms of, and I'm going back, from the start of the conversation.
Yeah.
Jewish, we got to wake up, right?
Mm-hmm.
We got to wake up. And a lot of that has to do with our education. And there's a parallel between the education in Gaza and the education in some of our public school systems here in the United States.
That's a good point. Right.
Because there's so much that what they're believing there, some of here believe the same thing. It's quite disgusting, like from the river to the sea, etc., etc., all these slogans and beliefs. So there is definitely an education element that, we got to get out. And it's not only there in Gaza where, even Israel is winning this war. You have fresh terrorists now that have been massively radicalized.
That's the thing with terrorists, and that's the problem. There's always a replenishment.
Yeah, there's always replenishment.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, that's we've got the same problem here in the United States. And I live here in the United States. So my concern would always be what's happening here where I live. I deeply love Israel, and I've been there, studied there for nearly 10 years. But I live here, and what I'm seeing happening in Gaza is literally happening in the streets of, Philadelphia and New York and, et cetera, in various cities. And,
notice, I'm so sorry, and notice it's not happening in the moderate Arab nations because they don't tolerate.
Oh, no, they don't. They understand very clearly what we're dealing with, and the West is really absent in the notion that, Islamic radicalism is a huge problem. It's a cancer, and it needs to be rotten. It needs to be ridden out of society. And it's somehow politically correct to say this, but it's not politically correct to say it. That's why people don't say it, but it has to be said. So in terms of why Jews in America are reluctant to vote with the more pro-Israel situation, with the pro-Israel party, which is the Republican Party here, by default. Even if you have Republicans that are more America first and they want less involvement, at the end of the day, I'll take that over whatever the left is providing us. And so we always have like 25-75. That's really the number.
Although it's increasing now.
Yeah, so 25-75, which is basically the average. 25% of Jews voting Republican, 75% of Jews voting Democrat. Hillary Clinton, we do have more, numbers like who voted in that election in terms of Jews, and it was around 26% voted for Trump, and of course, I think it was like 72% that voted for Hillary Clinton, which is more or less the average. 2020, there is, certain numbers to the contrary. I would believe that indeed 30% did vote for Donald Trump based on a very accurate number that I've seen. And I do know some polling, and I do this is what I, some of the things that I do is go into the nitty gritty of polling and statistics.
Was it the Chicago poll? Because
no, it's an exit poll. I don't remember who. It's an exit poll of the 2020 election. So this is how it's an exit poll of the 2020 election. Around 30% voted for Donald Trump. And again, we'll say 70% for Joe Biden. It's a 70.
Although it's interesting that all these years I've been voting, I've never met anyone asking questions after I voted.
Yeah. So
I've never seen a poller.
But that's on every topic. But so it's a 70-30. That's a 10% swing in 4 years. And based on the Pew Research, which we have now, which is one of the most accurate polling there is out there.
Would you say it's better, more accurate than internal polling, which is proprietary, as you know? And also, to me, the gold standard, just having worked on campaigns, to me, the gold standard outside of proprietary is Trafalgar. And what do you think about that?
Trafalgar is very accurate. There's a lot of accurate polling out there. Atlas Intel is a very accurate, was one of the most accurate polling industry back in 2020. The popular vote, they predicted the popular vote to go for by 4.7% for Joe Biden in 2020, went for 4.5. But they were probably the most accurate. Pew Research is more statistically, and they had a recent poll just I think last week or 2 weeks ago, where Jews are actually voting 34% for Trump, 68% are supporting Kamala Harris. We are seeing a shift happening.
Because I'm seeing numbers, not to jinx anything, but the numbers I saw as of 2 weeks ago, 43% for Trump.
Yeah, so it might be, and of course that's of a national, the national popular statistic. Swing states is of course different. Of course, it varies in New York where there's more Jews and more Orthodox Jews by far. The Orthodox, and I got to give it to them, the Hasidic Orthodox community by far understands what we're dealing with by far, and they're officially the less educated. So it's interesting. The less you get,
I think actually I will push back on that. Maybe traditionally less educated, but I think that they're the smartest of the Jews.
yeah, no, of course. But what I'm saying is
In terms of understanding reality, because they're the ones being targeted on the streets.
Of course, I understand. No, of course. But what I'm saying is they don't have the education that the vast majority of Reform Jews or whatever.
And we see that education gets you nowhere in this country.
Yeah, of course. Right. So what I'm saying is, 90% voting for Trump. It's not even close, and it's only getting more and more. And I think there's a lot of Jews that are waking up to what's happening. Again, it's a slow shift. You have to understand, even the Black population.
Well, more Black people, I think, are waking up than our people, unfortunately.
Yeah, in a way, especially Black men
and Hispanics of both genders.
Yeah, so what we have here is definitely a shift happening. It's going to be a slow shift, but we're talking about a 15-point swing since 2016 in terms of Jewish support towards Donald Trump, towards the Republican Party. These are very, these are the very voters that the Democrat Party relies on. And I would say where this is going to come down to, because we're talking about polling and elections, we went into that. It all comes down to Pennsylvania. Whoever wins Pennsylvania is 99% probably going to win the presidency. It's a given. And there is a massive Jewish population in Pennsylvania. Philly, Pittsburgh.
I forget about that because I know of Philly and Bucks County, but then I forget that I know Jews who live in Pittsburgh and I know Jews who live in Harrisburg also, and they're all voting.
So what we got to do as Jews, get that vote out in Pennsylvania. We have to focus on that state. It is the deciding state of the election. There's about 400,000 Jewish voters there. Biden won the election, or allegedly won the election in 2020 by 80,000 votes. Mail-in ballots are drastically down for Democrats this time around because there's the COVID effect isn't there.
I mean, they tried the whole monkeypox thing.
Yeah,
but realized that it's only one segment of the population that's getting.
Yeah, let's not talk about that. But we definitely know who's behind that pandemic. But in a way, it's gonna come down to that. Jewish voters are deliberately, that's why I'm saying get involved, because Jewish voters are probably going to decide who the next president is. It might come down to that. People don't want to talk about it.
You don't think that it's a combination? I mean, it could be a combination of all three, but Hispanics, both genders, plus Black men, plus Jews.
And that's these sectors that you have basically mentioned now. These are actually Democrat voters,
right? Mm-hmm.
These have been traditionally Democrat voters, and Trump has Trump has, which is by the way his credit. He has basically remade the Republican Party in a very interesting coalition.
Absolutely. Like he has made inroads into communities that, as I call it, the country club Republicans wouldn't touch with with a 10-foot pole. And when I was at the RNC, I could not describe how diverse it was. Like when we would think of the RNC of the early 2000s, right? Like the Mitt Romney and the McCains. We're talking about probably a lily white convention with a sprinkle of diversity. But now I was there in July. So many Hispanics, proud patriots, of course. So many Black Americans. Although I do have to note more Black men than women, which obviously is mirrors what is actually going on. And it was so diverse. We were sitting next to Native Hawaiians, and we were sitting at another day next to Hispanics from Louisiana. I met a former uh, drug dealer from South Central LA turned into Republican chairman of his area. And
Right.
he's been proudly involved with the Republican Party since President Trump. We're talking about those economic zones that President Trump had created in inner cities. So when we look at, and I'm sure you've seen like all of these man on the ground videos, right? Like on the streets or man on the streets, and they're going into the Bronx, and they're going into parts of Brooklyn that obviously have a lot of diversity, and they're asking these people, who are you voting for, Trump or Kamala? Most of them are saying Trump. And then the white people are saying they're voting for Kamala. So it's a complete shift.
It's yeah. There's definitely a realignment happening, and I think it's going to be a very interesting election this time around. I'm going to be very again. I'm going to be focused on what's really happening in Pennsylvania in terms of these Jewish numbers. It's going to be very interesting to see how much of an effect these Jewish voters had in Pennsylvania, and in that's why I'm saying education is key because whatever is happening in Gaza in
Right.
terms of education, which is a huge problem in the long term, you have victory. If you look at anything, what Israel wants to do in long term victory, education is a problem. You have some, little kids, at the age of 3, 4, 5, which they are being brought up to hate Israel.
Did you
To
know
hate,
that the most popular game in Gaza before the war, and I'm sure the kids are playing it now even more, do you know what the name was for the most popular children's game?
I don't remember. There is something. There is a game over there that
Yeah, it was
definitely
called, yeah, it's called Stab a Jew. These
sounded.
kids, yeah, so the one would play an Arab, which they were, and one of their friends would play a Jew, and literally they would be taught how to stab them.
Yeah,
And
it's
it's disgusting, but at the
absolutely
same time, you know what they say? They say for regular propaganda to be reversed, it takes 2 generations. That's regular propaganda, and that's the
uh,
thing, and that's the thing too. Like what we're dealing with right now in terms of Gaza and Judea and Samaria, it's worse than during the Nazi years because the Nazis were in power brainwashing for a decade, not near 80 years. And look how long it took for Germans to reform, and not just Germans. Of course, we have the Poles and the Lithuanians and everyone else
Ukraine.
that was involved, right? But we're talking about now, it's so much more ingrained over almost 100 years. So any notion that these people in Gaza and Judea and Samaria can somehow be non-killing citizens in the next 10, 15, 20 years, it's fantasy.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think, yeah,
Definitely, definitely one of the obstacles that Israel faces. There's
right.
no,
It's
there's
just
no
it's just the
doubt. There's no
propaganda. But something you said before. So you mentioned that sometimes it's better to do nothing as an American president for Israel, and I completely agree. So I know that my best friend works for an organization. I'm not going to name the organization, but they are on the right. And one of their donors called my best friend in a panic after the debate, and she was like, "Oh my gosh, like Trump didn't say enough about Israel. Why, why?" And my friend, who's smart, said, because not being overly involved in pushing for a ceasefire is the best gift that Israel can do. Because remember what Kamala said, Hamas Harris. First of all, it was so anti-Semitic that she said, I will let Israel, like, who are you to let Israel? Like, Israel's not your child, number one. Number two is that Israel has a right to defend itself. Yeah, hello, it's a nation. Every nation has a right to defend itself. So you have no jurisdiction there. And then immediately she switched into a ceasefire. Immediately that went into a anti-Semitic two-state solution. And President Trump, he held back. And he held back, I think, for two reasons. Number one, he also has to think of Arab voters because they are Americans. And a lot of Arab voters are not these extremists. I mean, some are, of course, but not all of them. And many Arab Americans care more about the economy than what the hell is going on in Gaza. So we can't
not
lose.
only not only that. What I think the concept is among some of these folks in the Muslim community. And there are so many great people out there. So many, I've been friends with, a great business owner, Turkish guy that has a hookah place here in Brooklyn. And, these people really, they're really like Jews. And they're not in any way, shape, or form anti-Semitic and hate Jews. There's so many like this person I know, so many others, so welcoming, so hospitable. There's so many great Muslims out there in this country.
Escape here to get away from the extremism.
Yeah, of course. And what I'm saying is not only, and this is why Trump doesn't necessarily need to respond to every question about what is he going to do to Israel. What am I going to do to Israel? The response is what I've done.
Exactly. So much.
And that is the result. The result of what I've done in 4 years is no one died.
Right.
Mm-hmm. That includes Israelis and Muslims.
And Arabs, right.
That's what people in Michigan and those folks in Michigan, and they really are, yes, they are on the fences about Israel. And I'm not saying that if you're a Muslim, you have to agree with everything that the Israeli government does. And I necessarily don't. I'm not a big fan of Netanyahu. I'm not a big fan.
We criticize Israel all the time.
Exactly.
I mean, the difference is that we're not obviously saying that it should not exist, or we're not lying about its history.
Yeah, of course. We don't obsess about it.
It's very healthy we criticize the American government. I've criticized Trump also. I don't think he's some god or anything like that.
Right. The problem is the people that there's no problem criticizing Israel. Right. The problem is when you start to obsess.
Exactly.
Yeah. Israel. There's so many things to criticize in the world. There's so much bad happening currently, and somehow a lot of people are just obsessed with what's happening in Israel.
Or they're criticizing Israel based on false information. So if you right, so
and this is where the education comes in.
Exactly. So if you understand that Gaza was part of Israel, if you understand they're Arab occupiers, and you understand what an atrocity, what a genocide. And I think more Jews need to start saying that it was a Jewish genocide, because, for example, yes, there were Muslims that were killed. There were Thai farmers that were killed, of course, but those populations were not hunted. If you remember what the Bedouin who was, and by the way, a fun fact for the audience, a lot of the Bedouins, majority of the Bedouins in Israel and in Jordan are genetic Jews. They were descended from the Jews who left to the Hijaz, which was a portion of the Arabian Peninsula. And then they assimilated, and over time they made their way back home. And it was no wonder that a lot of the Bedouins, most of the Bedouin clans, were helping Israel in 1948 and 67 wars. So, and then they, of course, and what happened in 67, the sheikhs came to General Moshe Dayan and said, look, a lot of us are Jews and we want to re-enter the fold and live as Jews. And Moshe Dayan, being labor, they were a racist party against Mizrahi Jews, only wanted this Ashkenaz supremacy. And he said, I have enough to deal with these brown Jews. I can't deal with you Arabs on top of it. So these sheikhs who, lost many of their clan members helping Israel during 2 different wars. And by the way, that without the Bedouin help, Israel would have lost the 48 war. They needed people who were familiar with that terrain over in the Negev and Judea Samaria. And so the sheikhs went back to their villages in 67. They were the ones who first adopted after the KGB launched Operation SIG, where they renamed Arabs, 6 different groups, to the Palestinians. It took other Arabs 2 years until 69 to like call themselves Palestinians. The Bedouins were the first because they were so pissed off with Dayan. So it's like it's things like that like, and I understand like it's the fog of war and everything is happening like so fast, but it's decisions like that that have ramifications. Like same thing with Ben Gurion and him calling Israel, instead of the country of Israel, the nation of Israel, calling it the state of Israel. You know, the reason they did that, it was for linguistic purposes. And he knew that Medinah means land. It does not mean state. So they manipulated that word. So at the time, you know, everything again was happening in haste. We just declared independence. We just you know, we have this opportunity, we need to form a government, on and on and on, not thinking that, you know, decades later, people are going to say, well, Israel's not a real country, it's a state, and putting a negative connotation, you know,
Right.
on, or like thinking like, oh, like, you know, we can manipulate Israel because it's just a state. So again, like they can be blamed for that, but things have consequences. So
Absolutely.
so the thing with Trump, and this is what I say now, because he did so much for Israel, there were times, I don't know if you thought the same, but I certainly did. There were times during his presidency, I thought, oh my gosh, he's president of America and Israel. He's president of both countries. So I think the best thing he can do, honestly, have a hands-off approach. Israel, you are a sovereign nation. Do what you need to do. We're not going to get involved. If you need weapons that are already owed to you, and they have many that have not been sent to them, that has been owed, that has been passed by Congress years ago. Here are all the weapons that you need. We're going to focus on our internal problems, which there are many. We need to end this war in Ukraine. That's siphoning off of billions of our aid dollars, and we can't have that continue. We're dealing with China. We're dealing with Venezuela. You see what's going on with the gangs here. So that would be the biggest gift that Trump can give instead of being involved and having the
Absolutely.
peace deal and this and this and that. Yeah.
The greatest Tikkun Olam
Mhm.
is stop people from dying.
Right.
I think, you know, the Democrats, progressive, let's call them progressive, have taken this word, especially the Reform Jews, and has been, you know, they've literally um, changed the meaning of it.
May I ask if you know what is the, because I had brief conversations with my Chabad rabbi, and
Okay.
he is the one who mentioned a while ago, like, oh, that word has been changed. And then I've talked to my conservative friends who are Jews, and they say, like, oh, the bastardization of Tikkun Olam. So I know what the bastardization means. It's like, oh, like we're a light onto the nations. We need to solve everyone's problems. We need to be these peaceful little fairies amongst the world. That's anathema to what who Jews are. Like obviously we're not violent people, but if you look at our history, and I know like in the Torah it says rise and kill first. It doesn't mean like go out and murder people. It means if you know that your family, that your personhood, that your nation, community is going to be attacked, you attack first to prevent that. So where do you know like when this change of meaning happened and what exactly does it mean like in its original sense?
No, so I don't know when the change happened. It probably happened over the years. As more progressive people become, they will try to um, make it that you should believe that they're doing the right thing, and they'll indoctrinate you that they're doing the right thing. And if you don't really go with that definition, then you're basically a horrific person. And I think that's what you see from progressives towards Trump and others. Just, you know, you become an horrific person by not really agreeing with what their definition
Mhm.
of progressing the world is. And it goes into this Tikkun Olam subject. You know, Tikkun Olam, actually, the meaning of that, just the meaning of it, what it means is correcting the world, or it's more than correcting. Correcting means the world, there's a lot of mistakes in the world that has to be corrected. It's more of making the world whole, right?
Mhm.
Making the world whole. If it's broken, try to make it whole. And I think what it definitely means in terms of the ideological aspect is, um, correct yourself before you correct others.
Mhm.
In the difference between conservatism, and it's much more than that. Conservatism is very aligned with religion in these days, because there's definitely something, progressives are more, reform and away from religion, and more, away from spiritual. And conservatism is more like aligned with, of course, there's, vast different beliefs, but conservatism more to the religion,
Mhm.
things. Um, but the difference between those two is progressive look everything as a collectivism. Community, collective globe. This whole globalism situation is definitely stems from that. Um, Everyone needs to be equal. Everyone, if you have in a way, worked so hard in life and accomplished so much, you're not really accomplished, because you know there's if you're educated and you work hard, then you become more than people that
Right. So,
don't do that.
right. So, how dare you be on a different level than those
Yeah.
who do not
So
who
in terms of in terms right. So in terms of in terms of actually making yourself as a better person, what happens is that with becoming a better person, you're not on the same level than others, right? You become better, and that's a problem for them somehow. So what I would say to Kunalam, going back to what I wanted to say, is the real definition is focus on yourself.
Mhm.
How can you be a better person? How can you bring light? How can you bring goodness to the world? And if everyone individually focus on that, what happens is that somehow the individualism fix a lot of the darkness and a lot of the brokenness what the world is going through. It somehow changes by itself. It becomes
So
a better
the collective energy is put out in the world.
right. So it
And,
becomes
and that's true. Like, sometimes, like, let's say, like, we are nervous about something and we think about something negatively. Like, I don't know if this happens to you, but then invariably something negative will happen. And if you're nervous
right.
about something, but you're positive, most of the time things end up positively. So I believe, of course, faith is very important, but I think there's an element of energy and like what we're call it faith, call it energy of what we're putting out into the universe. And I
Yeah,
think the
absolutely.
difference that I'm seeing, not just amongst progressives, but amongst the all Democrat Jews, is that they're thinking more, okay, we cannot be, especially with Israel, always Israel is involved, we cannot push back on our enemies because that's some kind of cruel and unusual punishment. We need to be the helping party. Like, we need to bring peace at any cost to the
Yeah.
Middle East, even if it means sacrificing our own and not protecting us. And that's, again, like, and it's not just Americans. We see it in Israel amongst the left. And I will be so bold, and I don't know if you agree or not, but the left in Israel and the left in America, they're one and the same. It's the same problem.
They definitely protest at the same time.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Somehow, I don't know.
That's
Whenever
something,
I see
right.
whenever I see protests in Israel, I see protests in in New York. So there's something definitely going on with that
Well,
ideology.
by the way, Soros, the Soros Open Society Foundation, I know at least before the war that they were funding all the protests in Israel against BB's reforms. So it's
And
absolutely tied.
did you mention Soros? You're such an anti-Semite. You're such an anti-Semite.
Such an answer. I was actually on a date with a guy who I did not know was such a liberal. And somehow Soros, I don't know how this happened, was brought up. He got up from the table and threatened to leave. I'm like, you don't have to threaten me. Like, if you think that that's anti-Semitic, I don't think we can continue on. So it's so like influenced among these people. Like they think of Soros as some kind of Jewish god. And and I told him, I was like, you know that he's proud of what he did as a teenager? And I'm sorry, teenagers do have consciousness. Like they're not
Of
little
course.
kids, they're being brainwashed. And to this day, like, okay, it's fine. Like you, okay, fine. He was a capo at 14, but you're being interviewed, what was there on CBS and asked, do you regret taking Jewish properties? No, it was like the best year of my life. Like, how are you at 80 something, however old he was at that point, saying that to a public audience?
Yeah,
And these Jews like are not understanding that. But okay, I would be remiss if we would end our conversation
absolutely.
and not bring up Iran. So my burning question, and I don't think I've asked you this directly during our Facebook Messenger conversations, of which there are many, but maybe like not in this way. So I keep harping on the killing of Hania, which was one of the best things that happened recently. uh, the two IRGC guards that actually carried it out, what made them turn? Was the amount of money that was being offered? Was it because they just were sick of the regime and they wanted out? Do you can you shed anything any light on this?
It's um, it's it's hard to know. It might be both. Like definitely in that business, money is what talks.
Mhm.
In the espionage business, there's also definitely an ideological aspect because, especially in talking about the mullahs in Iran, and they're very tight knit in their circles. So ideology would probably definitely play a role here. Um, for years, the Iranian regime has been very volatile. Now for probably a decade, and a lot of credit goes to Trump and what he did with the sanctions.
He bankrupted Iran.
Yeah, they were definitely bankrupt. Anyone that claims to the contrary just doesn't know what's happening. He definitely bankrupt Iran. I believe that probably Iran would have come to the table for a deal.
Mhm.
That would have been a much better deal than the, anti-Semitic nuclear deal from Barack Obama. Um, but I would say might be both. Definitely, incentives and money incentives is definitely a part of it. But also, I think there is this kind of unsettling um, volatility among the regime
So,
that
so you're saying that not all the IRGC agents are in lockstep with the regime.
yes, I would say that's true. I would say there is some elements. Of course, every few weeks you hear that they arrested people, even from the IRGC.
Mhm.
They arrested people, and they killed some of the people in terms of not only in the IRGC but in Iran that they think that work together with Israel. So there's definitely uh, people over there that hate the regime, and to identify those people, that's really the work of vast intelligence, you know, and with the prospect that we're talking about is from Israel, but even in other intelligence agencies like the CIA, is to pinpoint and target those elements in the regime and just try to get them working for you. But you know, again, another operation which is, have gone months of work has gone into that, in terms of, you know, that um, the New York Times said it's a bomb, or whatever it may be.
Mhm.
It was placed probably weeks and months before. Um,
Yeah, it
this,
was months that it was
yeah.
revealed, right?
So
Because I think they did it back in May, and then it detonated because they knew that
yeah,
they were coming back after President Raisi was killed.
yes.
Mhm. By accident, of course.
Yeah. So you know what? That might actually be by accident. Sometimes things happen that's just by accident.
I don't think it was accidental that they ended up in the most treacherous
It
terrain.
was it was a weather situation, and Jews control the weather. So
Well, of course, right.
okay, so you gotta be very careful there. But what I would say is, again, so there's definitely some kind. It could be a money sentence. It definitely is. Stems from ideological contradictions that some over there have. There's definitely the moderate section over there, versus the more uh, radical ones. And Iran is such a beautiful country. The people there are absolutely amazing. They're so smart. They're so amazing
And brave.
and brave. And there's so many of them over there. And I believe that, you know, um, there might be some change happening around in the future.
So that's the thing. So I think one of the few mistakes that President Trump made and Israel in working in not exploring this further, whether together or separately, was the Green Movement. So President Trump did not supply the Green Movement with weapons, and he famously said, like, okay, we don't believe in regime change in Iran. Israel also failed to work with the Iranian protesters of the Green Movement, and they were seeking Israel's help also. So now in this situation, now in 2024 lens, through the 2024 lens, do you see that either towards the end of the war or post-war, Israel working with the Iranian protesters to topple the regime? Because even some very smart leftists, I'm not going to name names, but one of them is on my advisory committee, and he worked in the diplomatic corps within the Israeli government, and the bravery that they went through to establish relationships with a lot of those Arab countries. He's like, you don't know where we were meeting. We couldn't use our passports. We're meeting in the middle of the sea on unmarked carriers. It's like straight out of a James Bond movie. What they were doing. So, but he's on the left, and in October of last year, he said without killing the head of the snake, meaning Iran, nothing matters. Because, I mean, of course, there is always going to be, there will be a Hezbollah, there will be a Hamas without Iran, but obviously weakened to an extent, unless we let someone else reclaim God. Like, all of this is tied. But toppling the regime very much matters. So, do you see Israel finally waking up and working with the protesters, or do you think that somehow covertly they already have been working with the protesters?
Um, there's definitely a lot of things behind the scenes. Um, I think most of the protesting over there is originated naturally.
Mhm.
Uh, Again, I would definitely think that, there is some involvement of Western countries, just like there is involvement from, Western countries with the leftist protests in Israel,
Yeah.
Western NGOs and different organizations, which, is a lot to blame for what happened on October 7th. Um, but I would say a lot of that protesting in Iran is originated naturally. There is a growing discontent from the people that are just sick and tired of the dictatorship, the radicalism, the restrictions for women in a grave way. So in order for anything change to happen, the mullahs in Iran have to be absolutely broke. Without money, they cannot go on.
Right.
And that would give vast amounts of power for the common people over there. My opinion on this matter is I am anti regime change.
Really? Okay.
Yes, it never worked.
But okay, I'm so sorry. So let me clarify. Anti-regime change only from the outside against the wishes of those on the inside, or are you against regime change working in coordination with those in the majority who want regime change?
Well, look at what's happening in Venezuela. Look at what's happening in Venezuela. Venezuela is actually something, that Western countries are very involved in getting Maduro out of office and toppling that regime, that communist regime.
But didn't he manipulate the elections and that he lost?
Oh, maybe. Again, maybe yes, maybe not. Somehow with here, I gotta officially go with the flow and say that manipulated the elections, and by our election somehow I gotta accept it. I don't know how that works. You know what I mean? I've
Right.
seen crazy amounts of very funny business happening in the 2020 election, and somehow um, you know, I'm not I'm not allowed to speak about it. I get banned and censored if I even
Mhm.
mention that the 2020 election in the US had some massive problems.
Of course, my accounts have been shut down because of
Yeah,
that. Yeah.
multiple times. So, so here I cannot actually, have these questions, but somehow in Venezuela, I have to go with the flow and accept the notion that Maduro, um, you know, influenced the election in a way and literally stole the election. So when is it allowed to question elections? When is it not allowed?
Right.
Is it forbidden to do that? But
But
it seems that
what about a population though? So the protesters have been going on in Iran for a while. We're talking
true,
about back to the Obama years, right? Like,
true.
Obama didn't help them, and then Trump didn't help them for whatever reason. Now we have a war, and would it not be a very natural ally for Israel, especially, to work in tandem with those protesters?
Maybe it's in the best interest of Israel. Um, uh, but again,
And two, talking about Tikkun Olam, and from the goodness of everyone's heart to help these poor Iranians who
let's
have been kidnapped essentially for the past 40 something years.
um, so yeah, again, anything that originates actually in a country, I support, right? Um, we definitely support people for that want a better life
Right.
in their country. We don't necessarily want them to come to our country. So it's definitely in our best interest to support them in their quest for freedom and democracy. And of course, in terms of Israel, if it's in their best interest to get to get something going in Iran with the protests, they should find a way of doing that. That is their business. Um, but in terms of the U.S., um, you can support democracy, you can support freedom, but getting militarily involved.
Oh, no. I don't mean militarily. I mean just giving material aid to the protesters because it's true. Because,
It's a very fine line. It's a very fine line. You know what I mean?
well,
Like,
I mean, like, not to like bomb. Well, I mean, I'm sure we could, but in terms of Israel specifically, right? So if the protesters for years have been begging with mercy for weapons, for money to buy the weapon, like something. So I'm just thinking that have you heard any general chatter amongst any Israelis that there is some kind of opportunity to do this, or is this something that's not even being entertained?
Currently, it's something that is not being entertained because of the position Israel is now and because of the strength that Iran has become under the Kamala Harris regime. Um, maybe, maybe in the near future, things are going to change, and the interests will change with it. But in terms of getting in a way involved, and I guess again, you can always get involved in a certain way with
In a very background kind of way,
right, right,
because even the protesters have said that if we have direct, very public facing help from an outside source, it's going to be less seen as a serious revolution, that it's not coming from us, but it has to come from us. But they said, like, we cannot do it ourselves. We need those outside resources.
yeah.
And they look at America, and actually more to a greater degree to Israel, because they understand that we're in the same region, and what's happening in our country is affecting Israel.
Well, listen,
Obviously.
yeah, absolutely. Like Israel has, it's not like Israel doesn't do these things already. Like Israel has aided Azerbaijan,
Right.
and they're
And smartly so, I might add.
yeah, they're bordering there. They have a border with Iran, and it's right the right their back door. So of course smartly. But protests in countries is not a new thing. We have protests. There were protests in Venezuela now. There were massive protests in Brazil, which is a different aspect, a different conversation. Protests are happening, and it's the best when it's originated naturally. And of course, if we could support, with some kind of aid to these people in Iran, to of course, further freedoms and democracies, for people that actually want it. And I think Iran is the only probably Muslim country where you have actually a population that actually want it. I don't think Afghanistan is such a country. I don't think Iraq is such a country. I think Iran is very different.
Right, of
Uh,
course.
they've been free, before 1979, and it was just a different kind of country then, and so there's definitely again, it's a great question, and we have to do something more, to support these protesters in Iran. But it's much easier done when the mullahs in Iran are dead broke. And it's a shame that
That's a good point. That's a good point. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
and it's a shame that Biden and Kamala just literally um, destroyed what Trump built in terms of putting max pressure on Iran. And they just literally gave money to Iran, billions of dollars, and propped them up. Then we had October 7th, and here we are. So again, it all starts with politics. If you want to really change the world, get involved. It's just not, it's not a political, like, oh, you're in politics. No, I'm not in politics. I'm not involved in politics. No, you got to get involved because there are people that make decisions that have vast consequences.
Absolutely.
And if you want an outcome, you gotta vote for a different leader.
And it's true. And, I had on a friend, a mentor, who was very concerned with anti-Semitism in New York City when it was rising even more greatly in 2009, well, before right now, in 2019. So she said, who do I need to talk to in the government? And so she established her own PAC. It's called Case PAC. Anyone can look it up online, and they're doing great work. So an ordinary citizen who decided, let's do something about it. So she said, like, we're all tax-paying citizens, and we are politics. It's not like politics is some separate entity. So absolutely, but vote for the right party and not have
Yeah,
Jewish blood on your hands.
Exactly. I'm not saying for whom to vote for, but
Right.
I think after this conversation, I think a lot of people understand for whom to vote for. You don't have to tell your friend you're going to. If you're really really reluctant for them
Right.
to know, just do your part out there. Take a friend with you. Get to the polls and vote. If you can vote early, vote early. If you can vote in person early, vote in person early. I would say uh, the platform that I'm involved is just an incredible platform. Go to red.bythepeopleus.com and just get there. You can rate policies. You can also rate how your candidates are doing in terms of those policies. It's a very incredible platform. And also, what it really does is it brings people from the sidelines that would have never been involved and gets them involved by creating your own team. You can create your own team and bring in people, and these people can create their teams and bring in their people. And what you develop is a pyramid voting that is just so big it could really swamp the polls. It could really swamp the election, and just what it really does, and this is what Tikkun Olam is all about. One individual making uh, a huge impact.
Mhm.
Uh, because until now, you just you got a friend and you went to the polls and you voted. Now with this platform, what it does is um, you can literally be online, use this platform, create your own team, bring in 4 people. Those 4 people bring in another 4 people. So you actually brought in 60 people. It's this pyramid voting of vast, outreach one person can do. And it's incredible. So go into that platform, sign up. It's an incredible user-friendly platform and get involved. It doesn't have to be on that platform. Just get involved because there are consequences. Elections do have consequences. And sadly, the consequences of the 2020 election, um,
We're
I think,
seeing it
I
today,
think, I
and
think
it,
the
it was
Jewish people,
and it
I
was
think,
deadly. Hmm.
yeah, I think the Jewish people really, really felt it this time around.
Right.
So, let's not
And let's not
repeat the
happen,
same
and
mistakes.
let's not repeat it again
Yeah,
at all.
exactly.
Not
Not repeat
anytime
the
soon,
same mistake.
but ever. Like, let's actually honor the never again and not have it be a slogan, but let's have it be a way of reality that never again does Israel need to build another mamad. Never again does any Jew need to hide
Yeah,
on its own soil ever again. And that all comes down to policies, the Israeli policies, American policies, who Israelis vote for, who we vote for. It's all tied together. So I thank you so much for your time, Mark. I know that
it was
this
a
has
pleasure.
been a late, I know this has been a late recording, but I know that the audience has learned a lot, has a lot to think about. And
Probably broke the record longest podcast now.
oh, thank you. And thank you for being such a wonderful guest.
No problem. Thank you so much.
All right. Have a good night.
Good night. Bye.